It all began in a quiet suburban town, one that looked peaceful on the surface, but was hiding a darkness that no one saw coming. Among the rows of neat houses and friendly neighbors lived a child whose name would soon be whispered in fear. His name was Ethan Grayson, a boy who, at first glance, seemed like any other kid. But behind his innocent face lurked something terrifying, something that would one day make even a judge tremble in court. Ethan was born into a broken home. His father was an alcoholic with a violent temper, and his mother, though loving, was too scared to stand up to the abuse. From a young age, Ethan witnessed things no child should ever see: screaming matches, flying fists, and nights of terror. But unlike other children who would cower in fear, Ethan watched with an eerie sense of calm. Teachers at his school described him as quiet and intelligent, but there was something unsettling about his silence. He never laughed with the other kids, never cried when he got hurt. It was as if emotions didn't exist for him, and as he grew older, his darkness only deepened. Early signs of a disturbed mind. The first warning signs were small, barely noticeable. It started with his obsession with death. While other kids played with action figures or video games, Ethan collected dead insects and dissected them with eerie precision. At first, his mother thought it was just a phase, a child's curiosity, but then it escalated. One day, a neighbor's cat went missing. A week later, it was found mutilated in the woods behind Ethan's house. When the neighbors grieved the loss of their beloved pet, Ethan simply watched, expressionless, unmoved, and eerily detached. His teachers grew more concerned. He had no friends, no real connections to anyone. When given creative writing assignments, his stories were filled with graphic descriptions of murder, pain, and torture, far too detailed for a child his age. And then came the incident with his younger sister, Lily. First violent incidents that hinted at something dark. Lily was 4 years younger than Ethan and adored him, always following him around like a shadow. But Ethan didn't seem to feel the same affection. One evening, their mother heard Lily screaming from the backyard. When she rushed outside, she found Ethan standing over his sister, holding her by the throat. His mother yanked him away, shaking with fear. But Ethan didn't resist. He just looked at her with cold, empty eyes and whispered, "I wanted to see what would happen." That was the first time his mother truly realized something was wrong. She sought therapy for Ethan, but he refused to talk. Every therapist, every counselor said the same thing. He lacked emotion, lacked empathy. He wasn't just a troubled child, he was something far worse. But no one could have predicted just how far Ethan would go. The town had no idea that they were harboring a future monster, and soon, the world would witness the horrors of what Ethan Grayson was truly capable of. The night of October 14th started like any other in the quiet town of Ravenwood. Families were settling in, children were finishing their homework, and the cool autumn wind rustled through the trees. But by sunrise, the town would be shaken to its core by a crime so horrifying that even the most hardened detectives would struggle to comprehend it. At 2:13 a.m., a frantic 911 call came from the Grayson household. It was Ethan's mother, her voice trembling with sheer terror. "Please, oh my God, my husband, there's blood everywhere. My son, he's just standing there. He's just standing there." When officers arrived, they were met with a scene straight out of a nightmare. In the dimly lit living room, Ethan's father lay sprawled on the floor, his body covered in deep, deliberate stab wounds. Blood soaked the carpet, splattered across the walls like a twisted work of art. And standing in the middle of it all was Ethan, a bloody knife still clutched in his small, steady hands. But what horrified the police most wasn't the brutality of the murder, it was Ethan's face. He wasn't crying, he wasn't panicking. He simply stood there, calm and composed, his cold eyes locked onto the officers as if he were daring them to react. When they asked him what happened, his response sent a chill down their spines. "I wanted to see what it felt like, how and why it was committed." In the days that followed, investigators tried to piece together the chilling chain of events that led to that bloody night. The evidence painted a picture far more disturbing than anyone expected. Ethan had been planning this murder for weeks. His notebooks, filled with eerie sketches of knives, blood, and disturbing writings, revealed his growing obsession with violence. In one chilling entry, he had written, "I see him in my dreams, the blood, the silence. I think it will be beautiful." On the night of the murder, Ethan waited until everyone was asleep. Then, he retrieved a knife from the kitchen, silently creeping into his parents' bedroom. But he didn't attack his father immediately. Instead, he stood there, watching, waiting. For almost an hour, he simply observed his sleeping father, tilting his head as if studying a piece of art. Then, with precise, calculated movements, he struck. 23 stab wounds, each one deliberate. No sign of hesitation, no sign of remorse. Ethan's mother woke up to the gruesome sight, her screams piercing through the house. But Ethan didn't run, didn't hide. He simply stood there, knife in hand, staring at her. When she collapsed to her knees, sobbing, he simply tilted his head and asked, "Why are you crying? He was going to die anyway." That was when she called 911, her hands shaking as she realized something horrifying. Her son wasn't just a killer. He was a monster. The police investigation and arrest. The investigation into Ethan's crime was unlike anything the local police had ever handled. This wasn't a case of self-defense or uncontrolled rage. This was something much darker. Detectives dug into Ethan's past, interviewing teachers, classmates, and neighbors. What they found painted a terrifying picture of a boy who had never truly felt human emotions. No history of empathy, no remorse for hurting animals or people, a deep, unsettling fascination with death. Even during his police interrogation, Ethan never shed a single tear. Instead, he sat across from the detectives, his hands cuffed, and calmly explained what he had done. When one officer asked him, "Do you regret killing your father?" Ethan's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smirk. "Why would I? It's not like he's coming back." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had arrested killers before, but never one like Ethan, never a child who displayed such a complete lack of humanity. The town of Ravenwood would never be the same after that night. The community was in shock. How could a 13-year-old commit such a horrific crime? What had gone so wrong? And as the news spread, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Ethan Grayson was no ordinary criminal. He was something far worse. The trial of Ethan Grayson was unlike any other in the history of Ravenwood. The courtroom, usually a place of order and justice, now felt like a stage for something out of a horror movie. A 13-year-old on trial for cold-blooded murder. It was the kind of case that sent chills down everyone's spine. The media swarmed outside the courthouse, news outlets branding Ethan as the monster child, the boy with the killer's smile, and the youngest psychopath. Reporters speculated whether he would be tried as an adult, whether he felt any remorse, and, most disturbingly, whether he would kill again if given the chance. Inside the courtroom, people whispered nervously, waiting for Ethan's arrival. The prosecution had a strong case. The murder weapon was found in his hands, his confession was clear, and his disturbing past pointed to something far more sinister than just a moment of rage. But no one was prepared for what happened next. The shocking behavior of the killer kid. When the bailiffs led Ethan into the courtroom, the air changed. Most juvenile defendants entered with fear, shame, or sadness. But not Ethan. He walked in calmly, head high, expression unreadable. He wasn't scared. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't even interested. He took his seat like he was merely a spectator, as if this whole thing was nothing more than a boring school assembly. Then he did something that made the room go silent. He smiled, not a nervous smile, not a fake one. A real, chilling smile, one that sent a wave of unease through the courtroom. It was a smile that didn't belong on a boy who had brutally murdered his own father. It was the smile of someone who knew something the rest of them didn't. The prosecution opened by presenting the graphic details of the murder, the calculated nature, the planning, and Ethan's eerie confession. The lead prosecutor, Daniel Carter, pointed at Ethan and said, "This is not a case of a troubled child. This is a case of a child without a soul." But while everyone in the courtroom shuddered at the horrifying evidence, Ethan remained completely unmoved. Then came the moment that shook everyone to their core. The 911 call from Ethan's mother was played. "Please, someone help. There's blood everywhere. My son, he's just standing there. Oh my God, please hurry." The audio of her desperate sobs filled the courtroom. People turned away, horrified. Some wiped their eyes. The judge frowned. But Ethan? He laughed. A quiet, almost amused chuckle escaped his lips. The room froze. Even the judge, a man with 30 years of experience handling the worst criminals, stopped mid-note, his pen hovering in the air, the laughter of a child, in the middle of his own murder trial. The prosecutor slammed his hand on the table, furious. "Do you think this is funny, Ethan?" Ethan slowly turned his head toward the prosecutor, and without a single ounce of hesitation whispered. A little gasps echoed through the courtroom. The judge immediately ordered order in the room, his voice firm, but there was an unmistakable edge of nervousness in it. What kind of child laughs at his own murder trial? How the judge and everyone in the courtroom reacted? From that moment on, everything changed. The judge, Judge Malcolm Reeves, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, couldn't hide the unease in his expression. He had presided over hundreds of cases, seen serial killers and sociopaths, but never before had he looked into the eyes of a 13-year-old who had absolutely no fear of the system. The jury members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some refused to even look at Ethan. The audience, reporters, members of the public, even Ethan's own mother, sat in stunned silence. During the cross-examination, Ethan's defense attorney, Richard Langley, tried to argue that Ethan was simply a troubled child with a history of abuse. Ethan was raised in a violent household, Langley pleaded. His father was abusive. He didn't have the emotional tools to process his trauma. But as he spoke, Ethan did something that made it impossible to believe. He rolled his eyes, not in frustration, not in sadness, in boredom. As if this entire courtroom, his defense, his mother sobbing in the back row, none of it mattered to him. The prosecution seized the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, does that look like the face of a child who regrets his actions?" All eyes turned to Ethan. His response? Another smile. A small, cold, knowing smirk. The courtroom felt like a freezer. No one could shake the feeling that this wasn't just a boy on trial. This was something far darker. As the trial came to a close, Judge Reeves took a deep breath. His final words before calling for recess were soft but firm. "I have been on this bench for many years, and never in my life have I felt such unease while delivering a verdict. This court will reconvene tomorrow, but let me make one thing very clear. This case is unlike anything I have ever seen before." With that, he banged the gavel. He banged. It has been years since the trial of Ethan Grayson, yet his name still lingers in whispers, in nightmares, in the minds of those who sat in that courtroom and witnessed something unnatural. At just 13 years old, Ethan was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in a juvenile detention facility until he turned 18, at which point his case would be reevaluated. The judge, despite his years of experience, had admitted, "I do not believe Ethan Grayson is capable of rehabilitation. He is not a misguided child. He is something else entirely." Now, years later, the world is terrified of what might happen next. Ethan is 18 years old now, an adult, and his case is up for review. Some say he has been a model prisoner, quiet, obedient, never causing trouble, but the guards say otherwise. One former prison guard, Mike Holloway, described his experience watching over Ethan. "He never acted out, never showed anger, but that's what scared me the most. The way he would just watch. You'd turn around and he'd be staring at you from his cell, completely still, no expression, just watching." "I've worked with violent criminals my whole career, but I've never been afraid of a prisoner until I met Ethan Grayson." In a chilling interview with a journalist, Ethan was asked if he regretted his crime. He simply smiled and said, "People like my father die every day. It's not special. When asked if he would do it again, his answer was even more disturbing. If I wanted to, I would, but not because of emotion, just because I can. Now, as his release hearing approaches, the world holds its breath. Will Ethan Grayson walk free? And if he does, what happens next? The psychological analysis of his actions. The biggest question that has haunted experts, psychologists, and criminologists for years is, what made Ethan Grayson the way he is? Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, a forensic psychologist who examined Ethan during the trial, has spent years studying cases of juvenile killers. But Ethan, she admits, terrifies her the most. Most child criminals act out of trauma, anger, or desperation. Ethan? He acts out of something colder, pure calculation. There is no evidence that he felt remorse, fear, or even satisfaction. He didn't kill out of passion. He killed simply because he could. Experts have debated whether Ethan is a sociopath, a psychopath, or something even more sinister. Some psychologists believe he was born this way, a rare case of a child with zero emotional connection to humanity. Others argue that his environment, his abusive father, his violent upbringing, created a perfect storm, forging him into something monstrous. But one thing is certain: Ethan Grayson is not like other criminals. Unlike killers who lash out in the heat of the moment, unlike those driven by hatred or revenge, Ethan's mind is a void, a dark, empty space where normal human emotions should be. And that makes him far more dangerous. The lasting impact of this case. The case of Ethan Grayson has left a permanent scar on society. His trial is still studied in law schools as an example of juvenile psychopathy. His mugshot has become an infamous symbol of childhood evil, appearing in true crime documentaries and psychological studies. His case has sparked nationwide debates on whether some children are simply born to kill. Many people fear that Ethan's story is not over yet. One juror from his trial, speaking years later, admitted, "We sent him away, but we all knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning." And now, with his release hearing just days away, the world watches with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Will he convince the courts that he is rehabilitated? Or will the world soon learn that the most terrifying thing about Ethan Grayson is that he never needed a reason to kill in the first place? And if he is freed, who will be his next victim? Final thoughts. Ethan Grayson's case is a haunting reminder that sometimes monsters don't come in the form of serial killers or masked criminals. Sometimes they come in the form of a quiet, smiling boy who never shed a single tear for the life he took. To this day, no one knows what truly goes on inside Ethan Grayson's mind. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part of all. The end, or is it?